Back to Jerusalem podcast.
Yeah, I'm back, and I'm armed with righteousness.
With your host, Eugene Bach.
He just seems like he's got it all figured out.
He's a righteous dude.
Yep. Hello and welcome to another Back to Jerusalem podcast. I'm Eugene Bach, your host for this time, and I'm coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of China. And this is a special podcast. This is a podcast that has been made for those that have been watching the news and what is taking place in Israel. We, as an organization at Back to Jerusalem, have just sent $10,000 to help with food, water, and Kevlar vests in Israel. So we have worked together with Rabbi Miles Weiss for several years, and we are working together with him to get water, food, and Kevlar vests to the people on the ground. But I know that we have supporters around the world that are asking the question, what is going on? What is the real story? Because you're hearing so much on the news. And I have to say that the majority of what you are hearing is a lie. This is an exclusive podcast. You're not going to hear these details anywhere else. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible and as simple as possible to explain the situation without getting too deep into the history, because it is complicated. And that's why so many people are confused. And what happens is the enemy often takes confusion, simplifies it into a couple of words that are lies that are easy for the enemy to repeat in your mind until the Christian church is repeating the same thing. So this podcast, I'm going to explain what is the two-state solution and why is there war in Israel. This podcast and the information in this podcast is going to share things that most of you have never heard before. In the two-state solution, I'm going to point out the 5 lies that make the two-state solution impossible. This podcast is based on researchable facts. Everything that I say is factually based and can be proven through history. The enemy will try to remove those facts, and that's what he's doing in the news, whether it's BBC, MSNBC, CNN, whatever your news source is. The enemy is trying to remove the facts and play with your emotions. And this is common. This is a common thing that we see on a regular basis. Emotions are often used as a weapon against Christians for the issue of like abortion. Emotions don't work the other way. You'll see that very clearly because killing babies doesn't hurt the feelings of the enemy. So they play on your emotions on not supporting abortion and try to make you feel bad that you should support it. Emotions are used as a weapon against Christians for the LGBTQ movement. You'll notice that emotions don't play the other way because the enemy doesn't give a squat about Christians and will ostracize them and persecute them in the name of the LGBTQ agenda. Is not worried at all about hurting the feelings of Christians. Christians are the most persecuted group in the world, and it's the group that people are the least likely to care about when they're being persecuted. Just ask the believers in Nigeria, North Korea, Cuba, China. When it comes to playing with the emotions of Christians, the Bible is very, very clear about this. Jeremiah wrote in chapter 17, verse 9, this verse, which I think that all Christians need to stop and learn from. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I, the Lord, search the heart. I test the mind, even to give every man according to his ways and according to how he feels. Nope. According to how compassionate he is. Nope. According to the fruit of his works. Let me read that again. Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I, the Lord, search the heart. I test the mind. Even give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his works. So, Let's start with the lies that are meant to appeal to your feelings. There are 5 of them, and you as a Christian are bombarded by them every single day with one of these 5, sometimes all 5 at the same time. So lie number 1, occupation. You hear it every day. The occupation Israeli forces, the Palestinian occupied territory. It's a farce to make you think that the fight against Israel is about justice. First off, Israel, or the land of Israel, has always been occupied. For God, this is going to take some of you guys by shock, especially those of you that believe in, the ideas of indigenous people groups being occupied, first groups or first peoples being occupied. For God, there are no indigenous people groups. None. First come doesn't mean first serve. Exodus 23:31. God made the boundaries of Israel very clear. And when he gave the boundaries of Israel to the Jewish people, there were people already living there, which meant that they had to leave in order for God's own command to come true. Now, this may not sound pretty to your ears. This may not sound like it goes along with the current ideas of indigenous people groups and giving back the first people certain lands. Exodus 23:31. This is repeated several times in the Old Testament. It says this, I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea and from the desert of the Euphrates River. I will give into your hands the people who live in the land, and you will drive them out before you. Do not make a covenant with them or with their gods. Do not let them live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me, because the worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you. God gave these exact borders from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, from the Euphrates River all the way down to Egypt. God gave an exact borderline, drew it out on a map, and then he told Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Joshua, David, Solomon, told them, each one of them in their own days, not just the borders, but the people that lived there that needed to go. God did this several times throughout the Old Testament. Occupied lands is brought up all the time in different newscasts to say, give them back to the indigenous people. This first people concepts. And it's the number one argument against Israel. The Palestinian people were there first, so you need to give it back to them. This is not true. And on all different levels, this is a lie. The Palestinian people are not Jewish. They are not Canaanite. They were not there. Israel is not a part of the Arabic Peninsula. The people that originally lived there 2,000 years before Christ, before the Jews arrived, did not speak Arabic because they were not from the Arabic Peninsula. They are occupiers as well. And they came after the Jews, not before the Jews. But even, let's just take that lie on its face value. If they say, well, the Arabs were there first, or that what they say, Palestinian people were there first, and therefore you're occupying their land, you need to give it back. Okay, is that true for all people that are occupying land? Because there is no greater colonizer in the world today than the Muslim people. The Muslims launched jihad under Muhammad and took over lands that were not Arabic and made them speak and read and pray in Arabic and made them accept the religion of Islam or die. Egypt is not Arabic. It is today because they took it from the indigenous people. The Egyptians are saying, give back Israel to the indigenous people. Okay, We will do that when Egypt gives back the land to the indigenous people of the Africans. Egypt is African, not Middle Eastern. But it's considered to be a part of the Arabic League. Why? Because today they speak Arabic. They have been occupied. They have been colonialized by the Muslims from the Arabic Peninsula. Sudan. Sudan today speaks Arabic. And the people that are in the northern part that occupy the main part of Sudan today are Arab from the Arab Peninsula. Are you going to give it back to the Christian African people that it was taken from? China says, give the nation back to the indigenous people. Really? China? Of all people? The Chinese took China from the nationalists. That's why you have the Republic of China today in Taiwan. Do we really want to talk about the Tibetans or the Uyghurs in Xinjiang? China owns and occupies Tibet. The people of Tibet want to be free from China. China owns and occupies Xinjiang. The people of Xinjiang want to be given freedom. So before these nations cry occupied lands, they should practice what they preach, but it's actually not what they want. It's a lie that is used to play to their favor. It's a farce playing on the guilt of Christians and Jews. It doesn't work the other way. There's no guilt on atheists. There's no guilt on Muslims. There's no guilt, and almost every nation in the world is occupying lands that doesn't belong to them if you look at the first people's idea. But even the first people's idea is only how far we can trace back history. It goes back even further than we can trace. And the Bible and God does not recognize indigenous people groups because he created all men, and all men left from one location and spread out to all the world as he commanded. So this guilt trip of occupation is a lie. It doesn't work on the Muslims because Muslims are the biggest colonialists in the world today. Even though they talk about the colonialism of Britain, Britain is an amateur when it comes to occupying foreign nations when compared to the nation of Islam or the religion of Islam. Occupied is not even the right word. Did you know that much of Israel was bought? See, you are told that Israel somehow put together an army and secretly marched in and took lands that didn't belong to them, much like the British did in America or Australia or New Zealand or wherever else that they went. They try to paint this picture of Jews being colonialists like the empire of the Brits. No. Much of the land of Israel was purchased prior to the establishment of Israel by individual Jews and organizations that supported the Jews to go back to Israel. In the 19th and 20th century, many Jews went back to the land of Israel and began to buy up large portions of land in the Jordan Valley and along the Mediterranean coastline. Their homeland. They bought it. Somebody sold it to them. The people that were living there sold it to them. It wasn't conquered. Not like the Arabs conquered Israel. Not like the Crusades conquered Israel. The Israelis, the Jews, bought it when it was ruled by Turkey. That's right. The Jews didn't move into Israel with a military. It was bought. And then it was donated. So the land that wasn't bought was then donated by England when it handed it over, which was their prerogative. A lot of people will say, well, the Brits didn't have the right to hand it over. The heck they didn't. They won it through war. British people died fighting the Arabs in World War I. The Ottoman Empire, which was a Muslim empire, declared jihad, a Muslim holy war, on the Allies and fought with Britain. Britain didn't declare war on the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire declared war on England. And guess what? England won. You declared a holy war, a jihad, and guess what? You lost. The second lie that you hear all the time is that the Palestinian people deserve their own country. Okay, let me talk about this lie, because we've just looked at occupied territory. That's you're going to hear that all the time on the news, and then you're going to hear people pulling at your heartstrings saying the Palestinian people deserve a country of their own. And every Christian that hears that responds. Every Christian that hears that, their heartstrings are tugged at. I get it. I understand. But let me just clarify some things, because that is a lie at its root. Why? Because the people group called Palestinians is an invention. There's no such thing as a Palestinian nation. They've never been. In the history of the world, there's never been a Palestinian nation. There's no Palestinian history. And there's no Palestinian language. There's no Palestinian culture. Basics. Let me give you the basics, because you're listening to this. There's a lot of people like, whoa, 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 whoa. Of course there's a language. No, it's not. It's Arab, which comes from the Arab Peninsula. Israel's not a part of the Arab Peninsula. It's a part of West Asia on the Mediterranean. It's not a part of the Arab Peninsula. The same as Lebanon. The same as when you go down to Egypt, the border of Egypt with the Egyptian Peninsula. Here's the basics. Palestine belonged to the Ottoman Empire, which was a Muslim kingdom, prior to World War I. They declared jihad against the Allied forces, which included England, and they lost. When you lose your land. Repeat after me. If you declare war and lose, you lose your land. Do it again. If you declare war and lose, you lose your land. The Palestinian people speak the Arab language. They come from the Arabic Peninsula. They don't come from Israel. They come from the Arab Peninsula, which is a part of the the nations that you have. If you think of the Arab Peninsula, you have to look at a map. Saudi Arabia. If you look at the map, you'll see the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, Yemen. That's the Arab Peninsula. Israel is a part of the West Asian Mediterranean, part of the Levant, but not Arab. Israel is not Arab. Did Arabs live in Israel? Yes. Do they still live in Israel? Yes. Throughout all of history, especially in like the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, you've had what's called the Falahin, or the Felids, where we get the word like, hey fella, the Falahin. These are Egyptian sheep herders. You have the Bedouin. You have the Arab nomadic tribes. But the indigenous people, as far as we can tell, were called Canaanites. That's the earliest documentation of that area, and it comes out of the Bible, and they were called Canaanites. Canaanites is kind of an all-encompassing term to refer to a Semitic-speaking people. And when I say Semitic, it means that they came from the tribe of Shem. You remember the three sons of Noah? Noah. So you have the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Well, the Jews come from Shem. They're Shemite or Semitic. This is where we get the word Semitic. And so you had the Semitic tribe-speaking people and the Bible names them, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Assyrians, the Jebusites, and this is key, the Philistines. Remember Goliath? Remember David? Remember the Philistines? That's why you have this word Palestinian. Now, there's no cultural relationship between the Palestinians and the Philistines. But that area has been called Palestine because it is meant to say the land of the Philistines. It's the name that was given to that area by the Greeks. And the Greek language of Philistia was given by the Greeks to that land of Israel, or the land of Palestine, to mean the land of the Philistines. So Palestine literally means land of the Philistines. And the Philistines were not Arab. This is so important to understand. The Philistines that fought the Jews, the Philistines that fought David, Goliath was a Philistine. And he was not Semitic, he was not from that area, and he was not Arab. As far as geology and geography goes, you can see that the Philistines were actually a seafaring, warmongering tribe. Outsiders, most likely from the islands of southern Europe. And they occupied Israel 4,000 years ago. Their language was not Semitic. That's why they were uncircumcised. They were foreigners. They were outsiders. So the land Philistine or Palestine, the name Palestine is not to refer to it from the Palestinian people. This is so important because a lot of people think, well, they're Palestinian. And the land has been called Palestine for over 150, 200, 300 years. Palestine is a Greek word given to that region, named to be as the land of the Philistines, not the land of the Arabs. And the people that lived in the area of Palestine, they were Arabs, and they were eventually called Palestinians. Their language is not Palestinian or different than the Arab Peninsula. Their culture is not different than the Arab Peninsula. Their traditions are not different than the Arab Peninsula, because modern day Palestinians are from the Arab Peninsula. And some of them, not all of them. Some of them, like for instance, Yasser Arafat was not even Palestinian, wasn't from the Palestinian area. He was Egyptian. So that is a lie. So the idea of the word Palestine, the word Palestine is not Arab. So that's very important for you to understand. The fourth lie that you hear all the time, and this is so important to understand, is that everybody says, this is one of the reasons why so many people were against the United States putting their embassy in Jerusalem. This is why so many nations do not put their embassy in Jerusalem, because they say that Jerusalem is a shared city. It's a holy city for the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians, as if it is equally holy to all three of them. That is a flat out lie. It is not an equally holy city for the Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims. Jerusalem is by far the most precious city for the Jews in the world. You cannot separate the land from the people. From the very beginning, when God called Abraham, the beginning of Judaism starts with Abraham. From the very beginning of the call of Abraham, God didn't just call Abraham and his people. He gave them a land according to their calling. The two are intricate and linked together and inseparable. Christianity and Jerusalem are separable. I know that a lot of people argue that, because I believe that where the church is, where God's people are, there he is in the midst. That in the Old Testament, God moved with his people in the temple. In the New Testament, we are the temple. And where the people of God are, there is he is in their midst. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in their midst. He's no longer restricted to the temple. So for Christians, there is an importance in Jerusalem. It is the city where Jesus walked. It is the city where Jesus wept. It is the city where Jesus ministered. It is the city where Jesus was crucified. It is the city where Jesus was buried. It is the city where Jesus was resurrected. It is the city where Jesus ascended. It is the city where Jesus said he will return. So don't get me wrong. It is important to Christianity. But if you're comparing the two, Jews and Christians, which I believe is the same God. And I don't believe in removing the two. But if you insist that the two are different, if you're going to make that argument, then Jerusalem cannot be separated from the Jewish people. The name Jerusalem as a city is specifically named more than 800 times in the Bible. 667 times in the Old Testament, 139 times in the New Testament. Over 800 times. And it's referred to over 1,000 times. Jews have a place there. Their temple was there. Their people were called there. It was their capital. It's always been their capital. It will always be their capital. They have been promised by God that their Messiah will return again, and he will build a new earth and a new heaven, and their capital will be in Jerusalem. It is inseparable. Is it just as important for the Muslims? No. Why? How many times is Jerusalem mentioned in the Quran? Let me give you a hint. 0. The Quran, the most holy book in all of Islam, doesn't mention Jerusalem even once. And you're going to tell me how holy it is in Islam when it's not even mentioned in your most holy book? God knows there's enough chapters and surahs in the Quran to at least give significance to it if it was that holy, but it's not mentioned even one time. When Muslims pray, which city do they face when they pray? They face Mecca. Every year when Muslims do the Hajj, where do they go? They go to Mecca. Was Muhammad from Jerusalem? No. Did Muhammad die in Jerusalem? No. Was he born in Jerusalem? No. Had he ever been to Jerusalem? No. Did the word Jerusalem ever even cross his lips? Not that we have record of. Did he ever write about Jerusalem? No. Did he mention Jerusalem in the Quran? No. Muhammad never set foot in Israel or the land of Israel, Judea, or Jerusalem. So why do Muslims say it's holy? This one is almost a joke. Why do Muslims say that it's the third most holy place behind Medina, behind Mecca, Mecca being the most holy, Medina being the second, and Jerusalem being the third? Why is it so holy? Because Muslims say that Muhammad flew there at night in kind of a spiritual meditation like a Buddha, science fiction, flew in the middle of the night, transversed across the desert, flew all the way to Jerusalem as if he was on a 737, prayed there, and then came back. It's bogus. It never happened. You can believe that if you want. If your religion teaches that and you want to believe that, that's fine. You can believe it. But don't expect me to accept your pot-smoking fantasies, because it doesn't change the fact that Muhammad was never there, he never mentioned it, he never wrote about it, and it's never been considered a holy place in Islam. Okay, so that's a lie. Jerusalem being a holy place in the most holy place or the third most holy place in all of Islam is a lie. Okay. But this all might be lies. But as Christians, aren't we supposed to love our enemy? Yes. Don't you believe that the Palestinians deserve a place of their own nation? And this is the point of the podcast, a two-state solution where Jews and Palestinians can live side by side. This is the part of the podcast that I have to share, because this is what you're hearing everywhere that should be the solution for the war in Israel. Israel was just attacked by terrorists. 40 babies in one village killed, murdered, slaughtered, many of them beheaded by terrorists. We have universities and groups, college fraternities, humanitarian groups, presidents of nations that are justifying this slaughter by saying that all the people want is their freedom. All the Palestinians want is their freedom. If the Jewish people were not occupying their land, if the Jewish people would just allow them to be free, this wouldn't happen. What they are doing, these groups are doing, what these presidents are doing, what these college groups are doing, what those that defend this barbaric behavior are doing is saying that killing babies, terrorizing families is justifiable if you feel that your land is being occupied. So there's a lot of people that say if we can just come up with a two-state solution, that will fix everything, where Jews and Palestinians can stand side by side. I have a dream. I have a dream that one day little Jewish boys and girls will be able to go to school with little Palestinian boys and girls. I have a dream. Right? We're thinking of the Martin Luther King. Why am I all of a sudden I've gone blank on one of our great heroes of American history, where the I have a dream speech was given. That idea of equality compels us to want to bring justice. It compels us to want to see equality. It compels us to want to see peace and love and acceptance. And we see in the news that the occupiers are the Israelis. They are the colonialists. They are the occupiers. They are the military regime. They are the ones bringing suffering. And the Palestinians are the freedom fighters. They are the oppressed. They are the ones that are being stomped by those that are racist, that are those that are bigots, that are those Islamophobes, those that oppose the speech of Martin Luther King Jr. So where does this idea of a two-state solution come from? I'm going to make this as simple as possible, okay? I'm going to give some details here, and these are very, very easy to follow. This is a timeline that will help you, I promise. This is not difficult. This is super, super simple. This is the two-state solution for dummies. It was easy for me to understand. I promise it'll be easy for you to understand. During World War I, which everybody kind of has an idea, even if you don't know what World War I, when it happened, what started it, what was about it, all you know is the whole world was at war, right? And the Americans or the Allies were the good guys, and everybody else was the bad guys. I mean, that's the way most people look at it. Not everybody, but most people. During World War I, the British promised to help the Jews establish their own state, to help end their persecution from the Christians and the Muslims. And they wrote a contract or an agreement called the Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration was a promise during World War I to get the support of the Jewish people around the world to partner with the Allies during World War I. It was a promise that if you help us, we will help you start your own nation, so that you won't be persecuted by Muslims and Christians. Oh, well, they weren't really persecuted by Christians. They weren't. Germany slaughtered 6 million of them, so yes, they needed protection. They needed their own country. At the time, Israel or the land of Palestine, was not a country by itself. It was owned by the Ottoman Empire, which is basically modern-day Turkey. And the Ottoman Empire was huge. And they declared war against the Allies, and they lost. And when you lose a war, you lose your land. Repeat after me. If you declare war and you lose your land. That's a part of losing the war. That's the risk that you take when you go to war with another country. So after the war, after World War I, the Ottoman Empire lost. So their empire dissolved. And that became the nations of Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and this is important, the area of Israel that was controlled by the British Empire. So the British Empire said that, okay, we will now take control of this area and build it up until it can be by itself. It was called the British Mandate or the Palestinian Mandate, where the Brits would occupy this area, build up the government, build up the economy until they were sustainable and could stand on their own. And the British were working on doing that as they had promised, but the Arabs hated the plan. And so because of their hate by all of the surrounding Arab nations, it was delayed by that and a little event called World War II. So World War II broke out. And during World War II, Jews escaping the Holocaust tried to travel to the area of Israel that was controlled by the Brits. And the Brits restricted them from traveling, would not allow them to travel to Israel. Why? To appease the Arabs. The Egyptians and the oil-rich Saudis did not want a bunch of Jews going into Israel. Why? Because they knew that they had a valid stake to that land. They already got rid of them once. They didn't want them coming back. And in fact, they built a holy temple, a mosque, on top of where the temple was to rid the history of the Jewish people. They sealed up the eastern gate where the Jews believed the Messiah would return and pretended it wasn't there. They built a Muslim graveyard where the Messiah was supposed to return to pretend that the Jews had never been there. They took every step that they could to erase Jewish history and make it Muslim. They didn't want them to return back. So they made a deal with the Brits to keep them from going back to Israel. And that's what happened. And 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. The Jews had nowhere to go. But after World War II, and the world saw the brutality of the Holocaust, the world came together and determined that the Jews should have their homeland back. And so on May 14th of 1948, a few years after World War II, the Brits signed off on their mandate and left. The same day, Israel took over and declared their independence. Within hours of the same day, the 14th of May, the Arabs began to move in to attack Israel. The same day. They had not been a nation for even 1 second before the Arabs moved in to attack them. On May 15th, 1948, the very next morning, the Arabs began their attack on Israel. Now, this is the important thing to know. When they talk about a two-state solution, Britain gave them that from the beginning. They divided the land in half. Britain divided the land in half, gave half to the Arabs and half to the Jews. And they divided Jerusalem in half, half to the Arabs and half to the Jews, and said, okay, now you guys can share. And the Arabs said, hell no, we're not sharing. And they moved in to attack. 57% of the geographical land of Israel went to the Jews, and 43% of it went to the Arabs. It's about as close geographically as you could get to a 50-50 split. And the moment that the Brits left, The very second that they left, May 14th, 1948, the Arabs moved in. Every single surrounding neighbor of Israel on day one. Remember, they didn't have an economy. They didn't have a nation. They didn't have a government. They didn't have a military. They didn't have a taxing to build up the military. They had nothing, and the Arabs knew it. You have to kill them as infants. The Pharaoh knew that with the Jews when he wanted all of the babies to be killed in Egypt. Throughout history, we've seen King Herod knew that with the babies in Bethlehem. That you have to kill the babies at their root. You have to kill the enemy at its root. That's why all of the children of Israel were being slaughtered during the days of Esther. That's why all of the babies were being killed during the days of Moses. That's why all of the babies were being killed during the days of Joseph and Mary. The enemy has never had problems killing babies in order to eradicate the Jewish people. Why? Because he doesn't want the return of the Messiah. Within hours, on May 15th, every single neighbor around Israel attacked like junkyard dogs. Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, all of the Muslims living in Israel, known today as the Palestinians, attacked Israel. They outnumbered the Jews. They had more money than the Jews. They had a bigger military than the Jews. They had more experience than the Jews. And they lost. Nobody in the world saw it coming. The Jews stayed and they fought and they won. And they won big. The result of that war, which was the first Israeli-Arab war, the state of Israel, that was only 1 day old, ended up taking 60% of the proposed area of the Arab state that the Brits had given them, that they could have kept. But they declared war on Israel. Repeat after me. If you declare war, you lose your land. If you've ever flown into Tel Aviv, you'll notice that the Tel Aviv airport is called the David Ben Gurion Airport. Why? Because he was a hero. When Israel was in their first seconds of infancy, he commissioned every man and woman to be trained how to fight. He gave strict orders that no Jew was to give up their ground. He told the people, you are in a fight for your lives. This is not about land. This is about your survival. We just came out of the Holocaust. We can never allow that to happen again. If we lose this war, we will lose our lives. The U.S. abandoned Israel. The U.K. abandoned Israel. The United Nations abandoned Israel. But God did not abandon Israel. And the Israelis, the Jewish people, pulled off one of the most spectacular, stunning military victories in history. At the end of the war, the Jews lost 6,000 men and women. The Arabs lost 10,000. 750,000 Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes. None of them were taken in or accepted to become citizens by any of the other nations, the Arab nations. None of them wanted to give them citizenship from their own nations. They wanted to support them to go to war. Why? To kill Jews. Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Yemen. They all joined the Arabs to fight and kill Israel. But none of them would take the humanitarian crisis of refugees fleeing from a war that they started. None of them would give them citizenship. If you care so much about the Palestinian Arabs, why not give them Egyptian citizenship? Why not give them Iraqi citizenship or Syrian citizenship? They didn't. They wouldn't. And they won't. Instead, they tried to force Israel to take in the people and accept them as citizens in the newly established Israel. These were the people that just fought against the Jews. They sided with the people that wanted to kill the Jews. And you want the Jews to take them in to become a democracy when they outnumber the Jews? The Muslims in the Palestinian area that was marked out by the Brits outnumbered the Jewish people, or would quickly outnumber them, had babies at a higher rate, multiplied faster. If they become citizens in a democracy, they would outnumber the Jews, and the Jews would democratically lose their nation. You can choose to be in a single one country of Israel, accepting all Palestinian Arabs as Jews. You can either choose to become democratic or Jewish, but you can't be both. Because if all of those refugees became Israeli citizens overnight and they hated the Jews would become nationless again. A few years later, Israel was about to be attacked by all those Arab nations again, and instead of waiting, they took preemptive action, and a stunning victory that nobody saw coming. The Jews were able to defeat the Arabs in 6 days in the 6-day war. Again, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, even other nations around the world supporting them like Pakistan, joined in, attacked Israel, and Israel won in such a decisive victory, only a few years into their nation being a new nation, that nobody saw it coming. And at the end of that war, they gained even more territory. They gained the Sinai Peninsula, which belonged to Egypt. They gained the Golan Heights, which belonged to Syria and Lebanon. They gained the Gaza Strip, and they gained the West Bank. And most importantly, they gained all of Jerusalem. Repeat after me. If you declare war and you lose your land. Israel had to defend themselves against attack after attack after attack by nations that surrounded them, that outgunned them, outmanned them, that are much bigger than them, and they survived to tell the story. War didn't work. An attack didn't work. Aggression didn't work. Now they're counting on the compassion of the West and the Jews, because they can't win militarily. And what's the compassionate thing? That brings us to our fifth and final lie, that is the two-state solution. Everyone is saying on the news, a two-state solution. That is the answer to the problem. That is why the Israelis are being attacked by the Palestinians. The Palestinians are tired of being occupied. Here's an uncomfortable fact. Israel and Palestine have been living in a two-state solution. The British mandate gave them their own nation. They chose to use that nation to attack Israel. In that attack, they went to war. In that war, they lost. Israel went and occupied the land in which the battles were launched from. Their attacks were launched from. This is the definition of the two-state solution, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's one simple sentence. It's the easiest definition of the two-state solution. This is the international view of the two-state solution. So whenever you hear a two-state solution on the news, this is what they're saying. The two-state solution is the proposed framework for resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by establishing two states for two peoples. Simple. Two states for two peoples. Israel for the Jewish people and Palestine for the Palestinian people. Seems pretty easy, right? Palestine on one side, Israel on the other. North Korea on one side, South Korea on the other. East Germany on one side, West Germany on the other. Canada on one side, America on the other, right? Simple. Side by side, live in peace and harmony, kumbaya, everything is good. The two-state solution has a big problem. It has already been done. And up until 2 weeks ago, it already existed. The Arabs have been controlling the West Bank and Gaza Strip for years. Israel packed up and left those areas. So what's the problem then? Why is everybody saying that this area is occupied by Israel? Because the Arabs are demanding a return to the 1967 borders. They're not happy with the land that they have now. They want to go back to the pre-6-day war borders before war was declared on Israel, before Israel preempted their strikes. They want to go back to before they declared war on Israel. Remember that land that you had? Remember the land that you were given by the British Mandate? They want that back. These are the borders that were determined by the de facto Palestinian state before the 6-day war, and they want a do-over. They want a mulligan. For anybody that's been out golfing, if you hit a bogey or if you hit like a ball into the sandbox and nobody sees it, then you take a mulligan and you do it over. They want a chance to try again. Remember, Israel took control of the West Bank and Gaza Strip after the 6-day war because if you declare war and you lose your land. Trust me. If Israel lost that war, nobody would be crying about Israel not having their own land. They would have lost. Because if you declare war and lose, you lose your land. Well, everybody's been saying land for peace, land for peace, land for peace. If you want the Palestinian attacks to stop, give them their land. Land for peace. If you want violence to stop, give them land for peace. No land, no peace. Israel believed that. 1982, they gave back the West Bank after they took it, after their people died fighting for it. In the 1993 Oslo Accords, the Palestinian Authority officially took control of the West Bank again. In 2005, the Israeli military went into Gaza Strip and forcefully evicted their own Jewish people. The people that fought and died for that land saw their own military come in and force them out. Thousands of Jews died taking Gaza Strip. And thousands of Jews were forced to leave Gaza Strip by their own government, by their own military. Why? Because they believed in this idea that if you just give the Palestinians what they want, you'll have peace. If they could just have a land to call their own, you'll have peace. In 10 days, the Israeli Defense Forces removed all Jews from the land that they gave to the Palestinians. And here's the $1 million question. They gave the Jews gave the Palestinians what they wanted. They gave them land that they rightfully took in a war that was waged against them. Did they get peace? You tell me. Is Israel a more peaceful place today after giving the land, after forcing their people out, after forcing their people to leave Gaza Strip? Is it more peaceful today? Is Gaza better off today than it was in 2005? Is the West Bank better off today than it was in 2005? Right after the 6-day war, when Israel took over the West Bank, immediately the GDP of that area went up. Immediately, they began to see prosperity in that area. As soon as it went back to the Palestinian Authority, that prosperity vanished. Gone. Why? Because the people that live there do not want peace. Every peace accord, land for peace, every time they gain more land through a peaceful agreement, where Israel hands it back, is a piece of land that was won without even firing a shot. Israel had to give blood to get it, and they had to give blood to give it. And the more they give, the more blood will be extracted from them. Because the bigger land that the Palestinians have, the more of a platform, a base that they have to launch attacks against Israel. Why? Because the Muslims don't want a little Israel. They don't want a little land from Israel. They want it all. They want the Jews to be pushed off the land and into the sea. It's in their constitution. After 2005, there was a split between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. So the West Bank is under the rule of Hamas, and the West Bank is really under the rule of the Palestinian Authority. But Hamas, as a terrorist organization, did not take over Gaza Strip by force. They didn't take over by military. They didn't take over by taking the Gazan people by hostage. They voted. The people voted for the Palestinian Authority. They voted for the Gaza Strip. They voted for the people who wrote the current constitution, which calls for the annihilation of all Jewish people. The two-state solution has been done. Land for peace has been practiced, and it doesn't work because it is a lie. Israel wants peace. Their neighbors do not. Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister of Israel, said it better than anybody else. He said it this way: if the Arabs put down their weapons today, there will be no more violence. If the Jews put down their weapons today, there will be no more Israel. Such a powerful statement. Let me say it again. If the Arabs put down their weapons today, there will be no more violence. If the Jews put down their weapons today, there will be no more Israel. But he doesn't know that. Benjamin Netanyahu hasn't tried land for peace. Yes, he does. He does know that. He tried land for peace. Not only does he know from his own experience, he knows from his borders that there's no such thing as land for peace in Islam. You see, the thing that Benjamin Netanyahu does is he learns from history. On his border is the nation of Lebanon, which has been launching skirmish attacks on the border of Israel. After the Ottoman Empire fell, when they lost the war in World War I to the Allied troops, including Britain, Britain had the mandate of Palestine, which was the Ottoman Empire, which means that the Brits came in and they administered Palestine, and they decided we're going to split it into one part to the Jews and one part to the Arabs. But there was another little small piece of territory on the border of Israel. It was just a small area, insignificant, right on the Mediterranean. And it was run by the French. You see, the Brits had a mandate for Palestine. The French had a mandate for Lebanon and Syria. And just like the British set Israel to be aside for the Jews that were persecuted in the Middle East, the French set aside Lebanon to be a haven, a safe haven for Christians facing persecution from the Muslims in the Middle East. And Lebanon was carved out. And there was a mandate on the French to build up Lebanon until it could become a free nation in the way that the Brits were building up Israel to be a free nation. And the Lebanese put in their constitution that their president had to be Christian because they knew that the way to maintain freedom in the future nation of Lebanon was through Christian laws and Christian leadership. The whole entire Middle East was already full of Muslims, and they were full of Muslims by force. The Arab tribes of Muhammad went in and took each city and nation and empire by force, raped the women, enslaved the children, killed the men, and anybody that would not convert was given one of two choices: either convert or die, or convert or pay jizya, which is the tax that non-Muslims have to pay to Muslims. So the French were doing very much what the Brits did. And they created this little enclave for Christians known as Lebanon. And what happened? Immediately after World War II, what happened? Lebanon, under Christian leadership, being a Christian haven, thrived. They grew faster than Israel because they weren't being attacked like Israel was by everybody and their stinking brother. You saw an economy that went off the charts. Universities was the best universities in all of the Middle East, arguably even better than in Europe. They became known as Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, became known as the Paris of the Middle East. Lebanon became known as the Switzerland of the Middle East. Go back and look. Just put in Google, 1965. Lebanon, 1955, Lebanon. You will swear up and down that you're looking at an American beach resort in Florida, women in bikinis, big fancy hotels right on the beach, some of the best food the world has ever seen. Everybody came there, including Arab refugees that were fleeing war and persecution and economic hardship in their own nations of Iraq, Iran, Syria, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. They came and they begged for acceptance. And Lebanon took them in. Before long, the number of Muslims far outnumbered the number of Christians. And then there was no more Christians. 1975, you saw a huge uprising, a conflict, war broke out. And the nation that used to be wealthy, that used to be Christian, is gone. The people, the Muslims wanted their land back. The Christians were invaders. The Christians were seen as crusaders. The Christians were considered to be a remnant of the occupiers, of the colonialists, of the French and the Europeans. They wanted their land for peace. They got their land. Even today in Lebanon, there's no peace. Benjamin Netanyahu knows that. He's learned from the history. He's tried to appease the world and he's tried to appease terrorists by saying that they would give land for peace. It's been done. It's been tried. Do you know anybody that's claiming that Beirut is a Paris of the Middle East today? When's the last time you were in Beirut? When's the last time you were in Lebanon? How are the people doing now that they have given power over to the Muslim rulers? They doing better? Huh? How's that working out for them? So if it does not work, if the two-state solution or land for peace does not work, why do politicians talk about it? Because they are trying to appease terrorists. They are trying to sidestep the violence. Hamas wants all Jews to die. And the West is telling the Jews, you need to negotiate with them. How do you do that? How do you negotiate half dead? Do you negotiate, well, half the Jews? You can kill half of our population, meet us halfway? What are the options that Israel has? Israel can't do a two-state solution for the reasons I've just pointed out, because the Arabs don't want to live in peace side by side with the Jews. The Jews can live side by side in peace with the Arabs. Arabs are in the Knesset. Arabs are citizens of Israel. Arabs enjoy economic freedom in Israel. Jews do not have economic freedom in Arab nations. They do not have legal representation in the congresses of Muslim nations. Israel can't really do a one-state solution either, which a lot of people might be asking, well, can't Israel just take over Gaza, take over those areas and then just incorporate them all, and then everybody could have citizenship in one nation? Everybody could have one vote in one nation? Making all of the Palestinian Muslims into Israeli citizens presents a huge challenge because they would soon outnumber the Jews. If they absorbed all of the refugees in Gaza and the West Bank, the Muslims would outnumber the Jews. And then the people that hate them would outnumber them. And that's a problem for democracy, because now you have two wolves and one sheep voting on what to eat for dinner. Israel tried giving back the lands. It didn't work. They tried land for peace. It didn't work. Israel cannot risk absorbing all of the refugees because it would be stateless again and without a country. It doesn't work. They are in the fight of their life. How will they survive? Israel is surrounded by countries that want to kill them. How will they survive? They are outnumbered by their enemies. How will they survive? They are only a small fraction of the land and a small fraction of the people. And out of all the nations in the Middle East, they are the only ones that don't have oil. How will they survive? Somehow, God has protected this little nation. Somehow, this little nation has defended itself and won over and over again. The entire world has turned its back on Israel. All of the neighbors have turned their guns towards Israel, and Israel is still standing. That is a miracle and a testimony that the people of God cannot be erased from history. With all of these things, it's amazing what God is doing in that country. Israel today has the most startups of new businesses of any country in the world per capita. Israel has the leading number of scientists and technicians in their workforce. 1 out of every 4 people in Israel, unlike any other country in the world, is employed in a technical profession that needed an education to get. Without oil, Israel has $100 billion economy an economy that is $100 billion larger than all of its immediate neighbors combined. Israel went from being a desert with zero products, zero produce, zero agriculture, to today being the world's leader and the world's wealthiest agricultural land in all of the Middle East. They've invented all these different agricultural things that make their land so much fertile, even though it's not naturally fertile. They invented irrigation systems, desalination projects. Israel is ranked 4th in the world for research personnel, and they have the highest number of PhDs per capita than any other place in the world. Israel, this little tiny nation, has dominated the field of the Nobel Peace Prize with various awards in fields including chemistry, economics, literature, and peace. Yes, peace. Israel has more Nobel Peace Prize winners per capita than Germany, the United States, and France, and has more laureates in real numbers than India, China, or Spain. Israel is one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world, with many of the top military technology innovations coming from that small little nation. And the best camera technology for drones and satellites in the world, bar none. They're also in the very top for human rights, like freedom freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of speech, a freedom that none of their neighbors give. None of the Muslim nations give freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Israel has the best justice system in all of the Middle East and the only real working democracy in all the Middle East. They do everything to protect children and women during times of war. They do more to protect Palestinian children than Palestinians. Palestinians use them as shields when they go to war. Israel protects the children of the Palestinians better than the Palestinian mothers and fathers. When the children or women are injured in a war that is launched by the Palestinians, or a battle, or a fight, or a protest, or a terrorist attack, and Palestinian women and children are hurt, guess where they go for medical treatment? They could go to Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. Nope. They go to Israel, because Israel provides the best medical care even for Palestinians. The Palestinians don't turn to Arab nations when they need help. They turn to Israel. For human rights, they give food, free water, free electricity to the Palestinian areas. Oh, but they're occupied. These Palestinian areas are occupied. They can't move without the occupation troops dictating where they can go, what they can do, who they can talk to. That's because they're trying to keep military supplies from Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia from getting into those areas and being launched against them. God has blessed Israel. He's blessed the Jewish people. We pray for this continued grace upon the nation of Israel. And that is why Back to Jerusalem, without raising any support, you cannot go into Back to Jerusalem right now and push donate to Israel. We don't have any projects donating to Israel. We as an organization wanted to give to the Jewish people from the donations that people have given to us, so that we would allow people like you to know what's going on without you thinking that there's an agenda. I'm not doing this podcast to raise funding for Israel. We gave funding to Israel without raising it. We gave from where most needed. People that were given to where most needed didn't know that it would go to Israel. Because we did not want to make you think that our ideas or our kind of this brief about Israel was done with a bias. We're not doing this podcast to raise funds for Israel. We're not doing this podcast to make you feel sorry for Israel so you'll give more funding to our organization for Israel, because there's no way to donate. But we donated to Israel because we believe in God's hand upon his people. We pray for the nation. We support the people. And we ask that you do the same. Pray for the Palestinians. Pray for the children and the families that are suffering under Islam. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We want to thank you so much for your support, your partnership, and your prayers. I pray that this podcast was informative for you and simple enough to understand the situation and the 5 lies that we are being told on the news every day. Thank you for downloading this Back to Jerusalem podcast. Again, I'm Eugene Bach, your host for this time, coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of China. God bless.